It's Mary Smith here, and today we're going to explore a powerful idea that can change the way you attract women, especially as you get older. And you know what's most interesting? It has nothing to do with money, it has nothing to do with looks, and it definitely has nothing to do with those cheesy pickup lines you find all over the internet. The truth is, there are two simple phrases that can communicate something much deeper: clarity of desire and genuine appreciation. When expressed sincerely, they can help create emotional connection in a way that most people completely overlook. But here's where this gets personal. Maybe you've reached a point in your life where you wonder whether attraction gets harder with age. Maybe you feel that younger men have an advantage because they have more energy, better looks, or fewer responsibilities. Or perhaps you've simply become more cautious after years of relationships, disappointments, and experiences that taught you to protect yourself. If any of that sounds familiar, I want you to comment clarity below. Not because there's some secret algorithm trick behind it, but because putting your experience into words can make you more aware of what you're actually looking for. And if you've ever felt that modern dating rewards loudness instead of emotional maturity, tell me that too. Your experience may be exactly what another viewer needs to hear. Mary Smith, host of Senior Mindful Living YouTube channel, and today we're going to look at something much deeper than a couple of words. We're going to explore why clear communication, authentic appreciation, confidence, and emotional congruence can become especially powerful as we get older. Because one of the biggest misconceptions about attraction is that it is primarily about appearance. It isn't. Appearance can influence a first impression, but lasting attraction is much more complicated. Human beings pay attention to emotional safety, confidence, warmth, curiosity, responsiveness, and the feeling they experience when they're around another person. And this is where older men can actually have an advantage. With age often comes something that can't be purchased and can't be faked easily: perspective. You've lived through awkward conversations. You've experienced rejection. You've learned that not every connection is meant to become a relationship. You've probably discovered that trying desperately to impress someone usually creates more anxiety than attraction. That experience can give you something extremely valuable: the ability to communicate without constantly seeking approval. And that brings us to the first phrase, I want. Now don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I want is not a magic spell. It doesn't automatically make someone attracted to you. And it certainly isn't an excuse to ignore another person's boundaries or preferences. The psychological power comes from what the phrase represents when it is used appropriately. It represents ownership of your feelings. Instead of saying, I don't know, maybe we could possibly get together sometime if you're free, you might say, I'd like to take you to dinner Saturday. There's a place I think you'd really enjoy. Notice the difference. The second version is clear without being demanding. You're communicating interest, but you're still leaving the other person completely free to say yes or no. That distinction is incredibly important. Confidence is not controlling another person's decision. Confidence is being comfortable expressing your own. There's a fascinating psychological principle underneath this. People generally respond better to communication that reduces ambiguity. When someone communicates clearly, the other person doesn't have to spend as much mental energy wondering what they mean. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever been talking to someone and felt exhausted because you couldn't figure out whether they actually liked you? One minute they're warm, the next they're distant. Then they send a vague message, then they disappear. That uncertainty creates mental noise. Now imagine meeting someone who simply says, I enjoyed talking with you. I'd like to see you again. There's no guessing game. There's no manipulation. There's simply information. And that's often much more attractive than trying to manufacture mystery. But there's a second phrase that adds something essential: I appreciate. This is where communication moves from simple desire toward emotional recognition. Imagine telling a woman, I want to see you again. That's clear. Now imagine saying, I want to see you again because I really appreciate how thoughtful you are. I always leave our conversations thinking about something you said. That's completely different. You're no longer simply expressing what you want from the interaction. You're communicating what you value about her. And genuine appreciation can be incredibly meaningful because one of the deepest human desires is to feel seen, not admired from a distance, not evaluated like an object. Seen. Think about a woman who has spent years hearing comments about her appearance. You're beautiful, you look amazing, you're gorgeous. Those compliments aren't necessarily bad, but imagine that someone notices something deeper. You have a way of making people feel comfortable, or I appreciate how curious you are. You don't just listen to answer, you actually listen to understand. That kind of observation communicates something different. It says, I've been paying attention. And being genuinely noticed can create a much stronger emotional impression than another generic compliment. Here's a real-life example. Imagine a man named David who is in his early 60s. He meets a woman named Linda at a community event. He's interested in her, but he's spent years believing that he needs to impress women with accomplishments. So during their first conversation, he talks about his career, his travels, his investments, his hobbies, and everything else he thinks might make him seem impressive. Linda is polite, but the conversation feels like an interview. A few weeks later, David meets another woman, and this time he approaches the interaction differently. He remains confident, but instead of trying to prove his value, he becomes curious. He listens, he asks questions, he laughs. And at the end of the conversation, he says, "I really enjoyed talking with you. I'd like to continue this conversation over coffee sometime." That's "I want," expressed naturally. Then, after another conversation, he tells her, "I appreciate how easy it is to talk with you. You have a really interesting perspective." That's appreciation. He hasn't performed. He hasn't manipulated. He hasn't tried to create artificial scarcity. He simply communicated honestly. And that is the larger lesson. Attraction isn't about memorizing lines. It's about becoming better at expressing what is already true. Now, there's one major problem. You can say all the right words and still communicate the wrong message. That's because words are only one part of communication. Your tone matters, your facial expression matters, your timing matters, your body language matters. Most importantly, your emotional state matters. Psychologists often discuss this in terms of congruence, whether different parts of your communication are telling the same story. Imagine someone saying, "I really want to see you again," while staring at the ground, speaking so quietly that you can barely hear them, and immediately adding, "But only if you want to. I mean, no pressure, and it's completely fine if you're busy." The words say confidence. Everything else says fear. Now imagine someone calmly making eye contact and saying, "I had a great time. I'd like to see you again." Then they stop. No over-explaining, no desperate justification, no attempt to force an answer. That silence can actually be powerful because you've communicated your truth and allowed the other person to respond freely. This is where many people make a mistake. They think confidence means talking more. Often confidence means needing to explain less. And if you're watching this thinking, "But what if she says no?" That's exactly the point. Emotional maturity means understanding that rejection doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong with you. Two good people can simply not be compatible. She may be unavailable. She may be interested in someone else. She may not feel chemistry. She may be going through something in her own life. Your responsibility is not to control her response. Your responsibility is to communicate honestly and respectfully. That's real confidence. Now let's take this one step further. There is another mistake men sometimes make with appreciation. They confuse appreciation with excessive validation. There's a difference between saying, "I appreciate how thoughtful you are," and constantly telling someone how amazing, perfect, beautiful, incredible, and irresistible they are. The first communicates observation. The second can sometimes communicate neediness. Genuine appreciation is specific. It comes from paying attention. So here's a simple exercise you can practice. The next time you have a meaningful conversation with someone, don't immediately think about what you're going to say next. Instead, listen for one quality you genuinely appreciate. Maybe she's patient. Maybe she's funny. Maybe she's passionate about her work. Maybe she remembers small details. Maybe she challenges your perspective. At the appropriate moment, tell her, not dramatically, not as a strategy, just honestly. "You know what I appreciate about you? You don't seem afraid to say what you really think." Then let the conversation continue. That's it. You don't need to turn it into a speech. And there's another exercise that can help. Before a date, write down 3 things you genuinely want from the interaction. Maybe you want to have fun. Maybe you want to learn more about her. Maybe you want to see whether there's enough chemistry for another date. Then ask yourself one question: am I trying to make her like me, or am I trying to discover whether we genuinely like each other? That question can completely change your mindset, because dating isn't an audition. You're not applying for the position of boyfriend. You're two human beings discovering whether there is mutual interest. And that shift from approval seeking to mutual discovery can make you calmer, more present, and more authentic. Now, let's talk about timing. You shouldn't walk around repeating "I want" and "I appreciate" like you're following a psychological formula. That would sound artificial. The words matter far less than the meaning behind them. If you've had a wonderful evening together, you might simply say, "I had a really good time tonight. I'd like to do this again." That's enough. If she tells you something meaningful about her life, you might say, "I appreciate you sharing that with me." Again, simple. And if she responds positively, don't immediately overwhelm the moment. Let it breathe. One of the most underrated communication skills is knowing when to stop talking. Sometimes a sincere sentence becomes less powerful when you bury it underneath 5 more sentences. Say what you mean, then give the other person space to experience it. And here's something else worth remembering as you get older. You don't need to compete with younger men. You need to become more comfortable being the man you actually are. Your age can bring experience. Your life can bring stories. Your mistakes can bring humility. Your relationships can teach you empathy. And your years can teach you what really matters. A woman who is compatible with you doesn't need you to pretend you're 25. She needs to know who you are today. That's why authenticity becomes increasingly valuable. You don't have to hide your age. You don't have to apologize for your life. You don't have to perform confidence. You can simply become more comfortable expressing yourself. And there's one final piece that ties everything together. I want, without appreciation, can sound self-centered. I appreciate without expressing desire can sometimes leave the other person wondering whether there's romantic interest. But when genuine desire and genuine appreciation meet, communication becomes clearer. I want to see you again. I appreciate the way you make me think. I enjoyed tonight. I'd like to do this again. These aren't tricks. They're examples of emotionally honest communication. And emotionally honest communication is one of the foundations of a healthy connection. So before you leave today, try this. The next time you're interested in someone, don't ask yourself, what line should I use? Ask yourself 3 better questions. What do I genuinely want? What do I genuinely appreciate about this person? And can I communicate both without trying to control the outcome? If you can answer those questions honestly, you've already moved beyond most of the superficial advice surrounding attraction, because the goal isn't to make someone obsessed with you. The goal is to create the possibility of mutual connection, and sometimes the most attractive thing you can communicate isn't, please choose me, it's simply, I know what I feel, I appreciate who you are, and I'd like to see where this connection goes. That's confidence without arrogance, desire without pressure, and appreciation without neediness. If this gave you a new perspective, leave a comment and tell me which part resonated with you most. And if you've ever experienced a moment when someone made you feel genuinely seen rather than simply complimented, share that story below. You never know who might read your comment and realize they're not alone. And if you found this valuable, like the video, share it with someone who could benefit from it, subscribe to Senior Mindful Living, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next conversation. Remember, you don't need to be perfect. You don't need the perfect words. You simply need the courage to be honest, the wisdom to listen, and the emotional maturity to respect another person's choice. Because real attraction isn't created by manipulation. It's created when 2 people feel safe enough to be honest about what they want and appreciative enough to recognize what they have found.